The virtual reality implies a temporal short-circuit that we call real time, a form of simultaneity and instantaneity of all things, of global information as well. Such a simultaneity is not without analogy to a kind of perfect crime perpetrated against the time itself, in the sense that time comes by this way to its point of perfection, this instantaneity of all the moments resumed in a single instant. But of course, perfect time has no memory and no future. Let's be clear about this. If the real is disappearing, it's not because we lack of it. On the contrary, there is too much of the real. It's the excess, the overdose of reality that puts an end to reality, the excess of information that puts an end to information, the excess of communication that puts an end to communication. We are no longer dealing with the problematic of lack and alienation, where the subject and the referent were always to be found, and where it was a kind of dialectic of subject and object, supported by strong and active philosophical positions. With the passage to the virtual, something else happened. To be sure, we have always been in a problematic of simulation, but in the problematic of the simulacrum, we can still hear the utopy, the topic and the utopy of reality, of the reference, of something behind or beyond the spectacle. The last and most radical analysis of this problematic was the one of Guy Debord and the situationists, with the development of a notion of a spectacle, of an alienation which still supposes a hidden or occulted reality, and hence the chance of disalienation, of a recovering by the subject of his autonomy and sovereignty. This radical situationist critique is over. I believe that today we have passed into another world. We are no longer in a state where reality is lacking. We are in a state where all that, everything which not so long ago was still alive as ideas, dreams, fantasies, utopias, is fading away, because in the virtual reality nothing more will survive as an idea or as a concept or as a perspective or a future. Everything will be immediately operationalized. You will not even have time enough to imagine. Events, real events, will not even have time to take place. In this context, the good old dialectic of negativity and positivity is over. We are dealing with an attempt to abolish all negativity, to constitute an entirely positive world and perfect world, experts of every illusion, of all sorts of evil, may be exempt from death itself. It is this pure, absolute reality, this unconditional, functional and optimistic realization of the world that I call the perfect crime. This switch into virtual reality can only be conceived as a dimension, as a passage from the dimension of crisis to that of catastrophe. This notion of crisis presupposes a real and historical world with a lot of tensions, contradictions, distortions. We have always been in crisis with the real and the world, but at the end of the 20th century, we are no longer in a state of crisis. We have entered into catastrophic processes. I don't mean catastrophe in the sense of apocalypse or annihilation. A catastrophic process is nothing but the eruption of something that functions according to rules and forms which we don't understand and maybe we never will be able to understand. Nothing more is simply contradictory or irrational. Everything becomes paradoxical. To pass beyond the end, beyond all finality, is to get in a paradoxical state. This very state of too much reality, too much positivity, too much information, and so on. In this state of paradox, of extreme phenomena, we no longer know exactly what is happening. In any case, we can no longer rely on something like a rehabilitation of the real and the traditional values. If perhaps, after all, the human species is through an enigmatic compulsion doomed to disappear, then it is better, rather than to simply disappear, it's better to exercise the art of disappearance. The humankind being the performer of its own disappearance instead of vanishing without even having the spectacle of it. To face with this paradoxical state of things, we need a paradoxical way of thinking. Since the world drives towards a delirious state of things, we must get a delirious point of view. We need a thought that no longer obeys any principle of truth, of causality, or any discursive form, a thought that knows how to assume poetic singularity, I would say, poetic singularity of events, a thought that accepts the world and its own indecidability. At this price, thought may become radical. This is not easy. We usually think that holding to the protocols of experimentation and verification is the most difficult, but it's not true. The most difficult is to renounce the truth and the possibility of verification. To hold as long as possible on the enigmatic side, on the contradictory multiplicity of thinking. We are no longer in a world in which things can be resolved by truth. Perhaps we are in a world of poetic resolution, ruled by what I called in the illusion of the end, the poetic reversibility of events. Let's take, for example, the language of classic communication. It tries to signify by discursive means, by inscribing reality in a meaning. But today, such a language is confronted with the hegemonic fantasy of a total and perpetual communication, where digital and extremely simplified languages prevail over the metaphorical richness of natural languages. With digital and binary languages, with coding, deciphering, the very materiality of language and its enigmatic, ambiguous character are erased. We hardly can speak of language anymore. At the absolute limits of complete computation and total cloning of thought, our language as a medium of symbolic exchange would become a useless function. For the first time in history, emerged the possibility of a virtual perfect crime against the language, of a total disappearance of the symbolic function.